Well, let's jump in and hit some OpenAI APIs. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. Do you see my browser?
I do.
Now? Okay, cool. So this is actually the plug for the original airing of this workshop. So I should mention, now that I'm on the screen, shout out to the MLOps World Conference, where we originally prepared this workshop for. And actually, the Generative AI Summit in particular was a new event. It's part of the MLOps Summit this year, and this is where we were presenting. So we created this GitHub repository, which you can all go to, and we'll share a link in the description for the video. And this has an explanation of how you can open up your Metaflow sandbox and then clone this repository, configure your sandbox, so all of the content will just load right into your sandbox. So I'm going to go ahead and follow these instructions, open the sandbox link, and then I'll just copy this command for later. This is one of the pages I think Hugo maybe mentioned earlier. There's a bunch of different workspaces that you can click on here in your free time, but we're actually not going to use any of them. We are just going to kind of airlift a new workspace into the sandbox using these instructions in the GitHub repository. Okay. Hugo, what are your thoughts on the sandbox? What should people who have never used it or don't know about what Metaflow is know about the sandbox?
I think they should know that there's, as we've kind of gone through, there's a huge stack of infrastructure required to actually do full stack productionized machine learning. All the way from the data, the compute, all the way up to the modeling. Oh, pardon me. And so to actually get set up with all of that is highly non-trivial. So what we want to do is make sure that you can interact with the full stack of machine learning infrastructure as quickly as possible without having to do all that setup. So you can jump into the sandbox and go through these initial introduction to Metaflow and see how you can scale out to the cloud, access Kubernetes clusters, deploy things to production, A/B test models, these types of things.
Exactly. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so I've just followed through step 3, where now I've opened up into this Generative AI World Summit. Just going to do a refresh and get our nice outer bounds theme on the VS Code here.
And that's the other thing. If you haven't seen our sandbox before, you may recognize it's a browser-based, superpowered version of VS Code, essentially. And that doesn't even quite do it justice. But we'll see. So maybe talk people through what you're doing now, Eddie, just so people can code along.
So if you're following along, this is just a setup script. Nothing interesting going on, really. These red blinking lights are just to call your attention to the fact that there's a lot of stuff, as we've been mentioning, that is already in your sandbox. We pre-install many things for you just to make it very easy to get started with these workspaces. However, in this workshop, we're going to be downloading some rather big models into the sandbox. And since these are free, they're not the most powerful computers. So we just want to make sure that you have enough space on your sandbox machine to actually run the examples if you want to follow.
And also,
along.
I mean, you just chose a kernel, so let's make sure people know what you did there.
Yeah, VS Code will prompt you when you try to run the first cell in each notebook here, and it'll prompt you and ask you to pick a kernel. So it should have the sandbox tutorial one by default, but that's the one that you want for this session is the sandbox tutorial. While that's loading, I'll actually show you something else about the sandbox that might be interesting to some of you. There are things personally that I don't like about VS Code. It's an excellent tool, but some people prefer a more classic Jupyter experience. I think Hugo might be one of them. Correct me if I'm wrong. But one little in your sandbox is you can always just go here and everything after dev, you can type /Jupyter. And voila, you've got the full-on kind of old school experience. I can click into my Gen AI Summit. And then if we want, I can kind of open up my notebooks from here and kind of do the thing that way if you choose.
Yeah, I'd push back on that. And so, I mean, I love Jupyter notebooks for exploration and doing notebooky stuff. But as we're talking about productionization, I'd encourage, I think I definitely do exploration in notebooks in VS Code, but when I'm deploying models to production, I write flows in scripts. And I think VS Code provides a wonderful interface for going back and forth between those two.
Yeah, totally, totally. Although, I mean, I suppose to counter the counter, there is kind of the IDE feel of the Jupyter lab community.
Oh, so Jupyter Lab's a totally different thing. Yeah.
Of course, of course. Anyways, yeah, this thing should just take a minute or two to run. So this one's taking a little bit longer just because it's a brand new sandbox, but not a huge deal. We can actually also click around between cells or between these sections, excuse me, while that's running. So let me actually just get rid of this terminal. Just move it
And maybe
down.
show people as well that, we've got that nice out of bounds and Metaflow table of contents on the left, but everything to the left of that remains the same. So you've got your local file system, right, Eddie?
Yeah, exactly. Like this is the normal activity bar, as VS Code calls it in their application. So you can kind of get all the stuff that you want. Like if you want to try to install any special extensions, you want to use the debugger, they have the Git stuff is already like configured. And then of course, probably the most important one is being able to navigate the file system with this Explorer app on the activity bar. Which, by the way, is basically all that this is just connecting us to specific files when we click on these buttons in this component that we've made in our theme. So let's check on this thing. Okay, so mine took 3 minutes to run, a little bit longer than usual, but that's okay. All right, so now I'm actually going to go ahead and do everything in the terminal because I think that it's a little bit easier to see what's happening in some of these examples to see what's like the output in the terminal. It's a little bit faster, and sometimes I've noticed that the notebooks can hang a bit when you're doing a bunch of API requests. So total matter of preference. You can definitely try it in the notebook if you want, but I'm going to be doing it in the terminal as well. Okay, so let's start off. I'm going to go ahead and do this pip install. And what we're installing here off the bat is OpenAI, Cohere, and this AI21 package. Now, Hugo, are you familiar with these with these companies / tools?
Yeah, I am, but I'd love for you to explain it for the viewer.
Yeah, so each of them are different model providers. So what we're going to be showing in this notebook is essentially how we can query those different APIs. And it's going to be much like going to ChatGPT and having a chat there. It's like we can create the iterations of that chat loop in our notebook, in our Python code, is what we're going to point out in this first section. And then the reason that we're including many providers is not to make a claim that anyone is the best or so on and so forth. Everyone's got their opinions these days, but just that there's many APIs that you can try and that they all have relatively similar kind of dynamics at this point in time. Do a little bit of comparison as well. Okay, so I'm actually going to just use OpenAI just to keep things simple right now. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the full process for making your API key and kind of how to get going here. So let's just go to Google, type in OpenAI API key. Click sign up. I'll log in with my Gmail. Feel free to stop me too, Hugo, if you have any questions. Now, the key thing is when you get to the OpenAI page, you want to click on your icon over here, and then they have this nice View API Keys section. So let's go ahead and create a new one, Hugo and Eddie Ragathon. It's not just a Ragathon, LLM-a-thon.
Great.
Cool, we'll copy that thing. Of course, I'll delete this after the session. Cool. So set my key.
Yeah, and I'll just add that this is a great example. Eddie will delete that after the session because we don't want you to use Eddie's key. And so Eddie has got this, assigning this variable, this string in the terminal, but you probably want to use environment variables, right? That's at some point, Eddie.
Yeah, that's definitely a good start. And then if we're talking about serious production use cases, even just passing environment variables around is not very secure. So the additional tools that, we're going to keep plugging. Metaflow has them built in called secrets is what the name is in Metaflow, but you should definitely be looking for how any kind of workflow orchestration system that you use for production things is allowing you to kind of like pass variables around like that.
Yep.
Super important. Cool. So we've got this generic prompt. How is generative AI affecting the infrastructure machine learning developers need access to?
And can you just make it slightly larger? You can close the contents and maybe reduce the terminal size as well.
Reduce terminal. So you want me to this down?
Yeah. Yep.
How's that look?
That's great. You can actually close the table of contents using the the Metaflow button as well, right?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Eddie.
Yep. All right, now let's go to Chat GPT and type the same thing. Just kind of see what happens. So right now I got my DALL-E 3 thing on, but you can obviously change around the settings. Maybe I should change them to turn it off so we have the vanilla thing. But anyways, we see what's happening, right? It's like kind of this listicle format, has like a little bit of code interspersed, kind of like classic ChatGPT style response here. So that's what we want to get to happen now in our notebook or in our terminal. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Let me raise this up a little bit. How's the size in the terminal for you, Hugo? Should I make it bigger?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit, because it's actually big for me, but because it's going to be on YouTube as well, just making sure that, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so now you'll notice on ChatGPT, we had this model that I can pick up here. How's it going? Oh, they're changing their interface. But we noticed like right here, I have DALL-E 3 selected. So you can select different models, which you can do the same thing in your Python code, which is what's happening here. We're picking a specific model called GPT 3.5 Turbo. And they have a bunch of different ones on the website that you can go look at for different APIs. And it's like a new data science problem in some ways, and also kind of like a dark art, maybe some people would describe it as, of picking which model is good for which use case.
And just on a small note, what you're putting it, this create from ChatGPT is a common way to give it prompts, and you're providing it under messages. You're telling it what role, so you're the user, because you can also tell it things it has said previously, and you can also provide like system level directions and that type of stuff. But having the dictionary role user and then content prompt is kind of just like using the API itself, right? Or using ChatGPT.
Yeah, exactly. We'll actually show you what the same thing, like I'll show you in a sec what the system message idea that you're bringing up.
Great.
We can like see how exactly that compares, and like how maybe a tool like LangChain might interact with the system message concept in a bit. But yeah, so just like Hugo was saying, this is like the same thing as we typed into the prompt there, or into the ChatGPT UI, and then we get a response, do a little bit of Python unpacking of the API response, and then we can just go ahead and print the string. And similar to what we saw in the ChatGPT UI, we get this kind of like listicle answer explaining how generative AI is changing the infrastructure landscape for ML developers. Pretty reasonable computational power, storage capacity, scalability, a lot of the themes, data pipelines that we're talking about in this workshop. Cool. Now, if you are curious or have a lot of time on your hands, just want to explore, there's other examples here to show you it's very similar to do the same thing with Cohere, where they have just a cohere.generate API. AI21 similarly has a completions API. So there's many options out there for you, and it's definitely a good time to be experimenting with all the different things that you have at your disposal. Cool. So I'm just going to keep skimming through. This is just the output of one of those. And then this section here, make it a bit smaller so we can see the whole table. The idea with this section was basically just wanted to do a quick audit of these different APIs and the endpoints that they have available to them, and then kind of back into a very rough decision tree that you might want to use to start to navigate, like, oh, this is my use case. This is what API I should start to look towards first, or just a little prioritization exercise I did for myself and wanted to share. But note, of course, that these checks and X's and maybe even what the rows in this table are very subject to change right now. APIs are changing really fast. But essentially, like you can look through this in your own time. But the upshot was like, these are some of my opinions after doing an analysis on what these different tools have documented and what APIs they have available. If you want the best chat model, pretty strong consensus view in the AI community that GPT-4 has the best API if you just care about raw quality, and that's kind of your single focus. If you're into multimodal stuff, OpenAI is also going very hard on the images aspect. You might have noticed over here, I was using DALL-E 3 is now built into ChatGPT. I think that may only be on the paid plan. Do you know that, Hugo? Is this the general available, or is this paid right now?
It's only on GPT Plus, but that may change at some point. It's actually, it's unclear how and when they're unrolling it to everyone.
Yeah. But yeah, they also, in addition to the image stuff, they also have audio. They have an API for Whisper, which is a very good transcription service that you want to transcribe your podcasts, your YouTube videos, maybe even
and also, if people, I mean, this isn't really about developer stuff. It could be. People haven't played around with it. I've got the ChatGPT app, and I subscribe to GPT Plus, right? So, and it has the audio and the image generation in the app. So I literally go for long walks and chat with ChatGPT. And then I'll ask it to generate images and have a look at what it does while I'm strolling. It's actually pretty incredible.
Yeah, totally. It is really awesome what they're doing with voice stuff. It's kind of like a super powered Alexa or something in this way, where the Alexa model is just like full on ChatGPT brain behind the scenes.
Yeah. Minor side note as well. I don't need to, like, when I lived in the US for 7 years, right, Eddie, and spend quite a bit of time there. Like a lot of the time when calling whoever, like my health insurance provider, going down a decision tree, I have to like put on an American accent for it to understand me. ChatGPT doesn't. It seems to understand everything I say. And I don't even understand everything I say. So there you go.
I miss like 30% of what you say, Elite.
Totally. Minimum. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep rolling. Okay, some of the other interesting bits here. If you care a lot about content moderation, there's 2 of these tools have dedicated APIs. Not saying the other ones can't do it, just that there is a dedicated API for Cohere and OpenAI for this. Multilingual models, again, like in the next notebook, we'll see that ChatGPT can do this, even though they don't have a dedicated API, but Cohere does. So they're very much focusing on the multilinguistic use cases, I guess. And then finally, one of the interesting ones is I've been looking at AI21, this Israeli company who's making several models. Probably the most common is called Jurassic 2, is like the recent trendy one. They have these interesting APIs for grammar. So if you're into these apps like Grammar, or they have this plugin with a tool I've been using a lot recently called WordTune. They have like dedicated APIs that can kind of give you something like, maybe you can put this in your JavaScript app where it's kind of like assessing, oh, that's repetitive way that your user is writing into your app, or this is a grammar issue, or that's a spelling error. So kind of like building in, I don't know, some clippy like experience into your app powered by LLMs. Cool. So Hugo, do you want to pop back to the slides to motivate why you might want to use an open source model in the face of all these wonderful tools, or should we just kind of stay in the notebook, do that quick, and then keep rolling?
Maybe if you could share the slides instead of us running back and forth.
So where were we here?
Slide number 27 is what we got up to.
Yeah, so we just went through hitting the APIs, Open API and friends, right? And we're kind of in this generic LLM use case, right? Where we have a generic model, so it's trained on much of the internet. There's a bunch of other fancy engineering happening behind the scenes, and like, sure, OpenAI is doing a ton of other stuff additionally. And then of course, like the thing that we really care about is getting relevant responses to our requests, to our interactions with ChatGPT. Now, Hugo, I'm curious to ask you actually, do you have any like thoughts around like what do we mean by relevant, or like what sticks out in your mind and when you see this picture?
What sticks out for me is that with general information, generic LLMs are pretty good, but if it's something that for me requires domain expertise or something like that, it may not be able to provide me answers that are as relevant for what I actually want to know. Does that resonate?
Yeah, that definitely is kind of how I'm increasingly seeing things. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of different definitions of relevance in data science that I think are really useful to be thinking of. And if you want to approach these things scientifically, it's a good kind of like proxy metric to be reasoning about, like what is relevant actually if you had to put it into an evaluation suite.
Yep.
Anyway, so we're in this realm right now of like, we have, obviously it's really high relevance what I am typing in as a user into ChatGPT. It's like the most relevant thing of any of this is like, what is my question, or like, what is my goal? Mm-hmm. And the end game is here, we want to increase the response relevance. So like we're kind of like basically stating here, like you might get something super relevant in ChatGPT, but it also might just like totally make something up or be like, hey, I wasn't trained on data since 2021, so blah blah blah. I can't help you. Not very relevant.